thank you, Ashley, for the introduction and having me here at Selenium Conference in beautiful London. It's a joy to be here. I'm speaking at my second Selenium Conference, and this is one of my favorite cities in the whole world. And welcome everyone to my talk. So, are you ready to do one more for today? And then we can all party? Okay, good. Now, let's do a little exercise together. So, introduce yourself to the person sitting next to you and get to know each other a little bit, okay? I know you're hating me for this, but I'm... Now, picture this. Your organization decides tomorrow that you are changing your ways of working to internal open source. So what would you do? How would you react? How would you navigate through this change? Take 1 minute and discuss this with your newly made acquaintance. Okay, so you've answered some of these questions. Now, let's spend the next 45 minutes together with my experience with internal open source. How did we end up using it, what it's meant to be, and what have we learned from all this experience? So, speaking about change, I want to share with you a quote that really inspired me while doing research for this talk. The only constant in life is change. Did you know that recent studies have shown that people change jobs 12 to 15 times in their lifetime? And myself, I'm no stranger to change. I began my career in 2006. I was a .NET developer in a really, really small firm. We did pretty much everything. We developed, we tested our own code, we did maintenance, we did deployment, we did debugging, and all sorts of things that you do at such a small firm. Then in 2011, I took a really leap of faith, and when a friend of mine said, well, I have a job for you, it's a testing job. Do you want to do it? And I was like, well, I can't find any .NET developer jobs at the time, and I really want to switch. I don't know what testers do. And it was also involving Java, which I hadn't coded in since university. So, I was like, OK, what's the worst thing that can happen? And that began my career at Betfair Romania, which I've been with for the last 8 years. It's part of the Paddy Power Betfair group, and which currently owns, I don't know, about 3 other brands to do betting. During my 8 years there, I've switched jobs 4 times. I've been a performance tester, an automation engineer. I did security testing, performance, deployment releases, and all sorts of things. And for the last 3 years, I've been a delivery manager in charge currently of 1 team. Speaking of change, same as humans, businesses go through the same process of change, whether it's because of new leadership, whether it's because of changes in technology or changes in the way competitors work. We all know that our companies and other companies are going to change, which is quite funny because last week I was on vacation and the company just announced that we are merging with another group. So it's quite fitting for me to do this talk now when knowing that another change is somewhere in my near future. What that will bring, I don't know. But what I do know is that that requires us to be able to cope with change, to anticipate it and work with it and within it. So, internal open source, what does it even mean? The nice definition and the way all the internet says it is also known as inner source, you might have heard of it, is when an organization adopts open source development practices and culture while still developing their proprietary software. It sounds easy in practice, but it means different things to different organizations. So for example, my current team owns microservices and a front-end application that is used by our customer services team, which is part of our back-office tooling. We own these applications, we own the code, the tests, we do second-level support for it, operational support in production. However, all the other engineering teams are free to come and do their projects and contribute to the code of our microservices. which means we get kind of the best of both worlds. We do still maintain operational ownership, but we do get the benefit of opening up contributions and having the whole company contribute to the code base. Now, let's take a look of how we ended up using internal open source, because we weren't working this way 8 years ago. So, to look back, I went in and did say, what were all the things that have gotten us here? And I've done this exercise, and I kind of came up with 3 major, let's say, IRAs that we went through since my time with the organization. So we started by having siloed teams that worked on monolith applications. Then we went on working on microservices, with build and run teams. And we are still using microservices, but we are working in an internal open source way. There are 2 major aspects to these changes, right? There's the organizational aspect and the architectural aspect. Those 2 are often mistaken, but they are not the same. So the organizational aspect means you need to get people to change. The technical one, or the architectural one, means you need to get the people to change the technology, to do a lot of work to actually change that technology stack. Let's explore everything in a little bit more detail. So when I joined in 2011, there were about 120 of us in the Cluj office, with about 500 in the whole company, not just the technology department. I was one of working in one of the testing teams that worked on the big monolith applications. One of the first things I noticed when I joined is that even though we were supposed to be working in Scrum and work together, the people working in the same team came from, siloed teams. There were 6 of us in one Scrum team, but the 3 developers had one manager, the database developer had another manager, the testers had another manager, and then we all had to work with a project manager that was supposed to deliver a project, but did not have any authority over us by any stretch of the imagination. So I often would find myself, well, who do I listen to? Like, do I listen to my manager? Do I listen to the project manager? Or who kind of is in charge here? And releases back then were really a pain. You had to get like 5 sign-offs. So did the release manager sign off? Did the test manager sign off? Did the performance manager sign off? Is really a goal build? Are you sure? And then just taking it out and having to deploy these big monolithic applications is really a pain. So the first project I ever worked was to implement the login functionality for our Italian customers. We were launching our website in Italy, and the Italian Gambling Authority had a very specific way of actually wanting people to log in. Of course, they wanted everything to know about you, including your shoe size. Thank you very much, Italian Gambling Authority. So we got ready to launch. We had the plan of deploying it to production sort of in dark, just before the actual launch. I actually remember, because it was my first time in London, all the project team gathered here. We had gotten all the necessary sign-offs, had all the paperwork done. OK, it's time to release, all good. The release, even though it took 6 hours, it was done. We tested it. Everyone was happy. Yay, hooray, fine. Then, at about 10 p.m. UK time, came complaints from our Australian customers. Suddenly, they were having login problems. There were issues with their payment methods. And of course, the second-line support engineer in the UK had no idea what we had actually implemented in that big monolith application, because he was from a separate team and doing second-line support. And his only choice at that time, because we weren't even on call, was to actually roll back the release. It took him another 6 hours to roll back the release. And I'm not going to tell you we had a 6 months delay on the project because of that. So then, 3 months into my job, there were some changes announced. We were moving towards a service-oriented architecture and trying to get rid of that big monolith. I was really excited about this part. Even though I had started to do the tester job and working just 3 months ago, I knew and could see that, I did not like that big monolith code base. The code was not great, the tests were rubbish, they were really hard to understand. We were supposed to have automation, but it was more about quantity than quality. One of those companies that had to input by the end of the week how many tests you automated that week, which was kind of defeating the purpose. But there was one aspect that I was really scared about. So we were changing the teams as well. I'm there 3 months. Who wouldn't be scared of completely having new teammates, a new manager, and new ways of working just 3 months in? I was, honest to God. So let's look at how the team and how the organization look now. The former silo teams were disbanded, and new teams were recreated from their members. I ended up in what we called the accounts team, which consisted of 3 developers, 2 testers, 1 database developer, and 1 product owner. And we finally all had the same manager. We were now what I like to call build and run teams, which is just another fancy way of saying DevOps. We were responsible and accountable for everything from deployment, development, building, performance testing, maintaining the code operationally in production, and all the likes. So, really that brought us closer together as a team and kind of pushed us to make the code better and make everything better. And we were fortunate enough to be part of the team that actually disbanded that big monolith and started working on microservices. And, we pushed one another to maintain, the code better, to improve logs, to fix defects, because we were ending up being responsible for everything, not just our little box. So alongside those organizational changes, as I mentioned, we were changing the technology stack as well. We were moving to microservices. So this allowed us as a team to shape how we wanted these new components to look. Look, we worked on the old monolith. We kind of know what the pain points are. We kind of know how to split the monolith into microservices to make sense for us. And we were fortunate enough to be able to do that, to shape the components, the tests, the performance tests, and everything. And it gave us full ownership over one specific microservice or one specific area that we could evolve it in every way we wanted. But, for example, for myself, even now, I'm being called upon to discuss things from the responsible gambling microservices, because I've been there from the start, and I'm kind of the resident domain expert on those services. Even if I don't work on them currently, I'm still being called upon to kind of explain the business flows and everything. So that's something that was really beneficial at the time. And it wasn't really always easy to just work in this way. We had both, of course, the monolith app and microservices. That monolith app did not go away overnight. But I feel like it was a blessing in disguise in a way. While waiting for microservices to catch up feature-wise, you still had to implement some of the things in the big monolith application. And at one point, people were being really fortunate to be able to compare and contrast ways of working and say, well, I don't really want to work in that. Everyone was scared of changing, but they soon realized, I don't really want to work in that old way before. I don't really want to work on the monolith applications. I really would like to catch up the microservices feature-wise to be able just to work in these new ways of working, right? So in a small production ecosystem, this model worked quite well. And it worked quite well for us for about 5 years. People became really happy with it. We became really proficient in working this way. As the time passed, we kept growing, of course, as one does, both in terms of teams and in terms of microservices. So in 2012, we started with 6 teams and 4 microservices. Fast forward 5 years later, we reached 15 teams and 140 microservices in just our department alone. with about, I would say, 900, but I'm sure as I'm speaking, the number keeps growing. 900 microservices in the whole company. I'm not sure what the merger has brought over, so I'm not counting those ones. So during that time, change also happened to me on a personal level. I crossed over to the dark side, aka became a manager, and was responsible for 2 teams at that point. So with our ever-growing scale, that model created, operational problems and bottlenecks. So, yeah, moving too fast. One day, about a year and a half ago, an email came. It was titled Organizational Update. Whoever got one of those in their inboxes. Describing how and why our organizational model would be changing. We were moving to a new customer-obsessed operating model. We were being inspired by Spotify's Tribes and Squads organization. In this model, people are grouped in self-sufficient squads, and then multiple squads that work on the same feature make a tribe. Myself as a manager knew the email was coming probably a week in advance, let's say, and I was trying to mentally prepare myself for any question that might arise, for how my team would react, for how other people would react. And I kind of sort of did some research on it. But of course, for most of the people in the organization, the email came as a surprise. They were like, well, we are working so well in this way, why do we need to change? So what is changing? How does this change reflect on me? Why, what, how? All these questions were floating around at the time. And even if we had a bit of a head start in knowing this, we weren't actually given, direction of how exactly does this work. We were like, well, it's changing, but we still don't know how. And then, what does that mean for the teams? I find it quite funny. There's a quote by a Romanian playwright. He's called Caragiale. It was one of the funniest guys in the 1800s. His sort of a loose translation is, I want things to be different, but I don't want anything to change. So that kind of applied with the situation at hand. So what was actually changing? Let's take a look at the team's dynamic in the new operating model. We are operating with 2 concepts, a home squad and a project squad. A home squad is the component owner, right? It owns the code, the tests, the operational support for the component. They are the ones that know the architectural vision, the future plans for that, and the ones responsible for the overall quality. A project squad is a team that needs to develop features in 1 or more components owned by the home squad in order to deliver a project. You can be, a home squad and a project squad at the same time. You have projects to implement in other people's code. They have projects to implement in your code. There could be more than 1 project squads working at the same time in your component, as one does, because projects are not linear. And, after the change was announced, we started to actually look, okay, we know the broad terms, but how does this day-to-day work actually, how do we work together? How do we cross paths? How do we work in this model? We started studying various, open source projects to kind of see, okay, how are people collaborating? What are the rules? What are the README files, the contributing files for those open source projects? Kind of draw inspiration and adapt those to our, of course, specifics. And we spent about, I would say, 3 months and countless meetings to discuss some of the points in how to work day to day. But, we finally agreed upon a ways of working framework. So when the satellite squad wanted to implement a new feature called My Betfair Rewards, which is sort of, you get points for placing bets and that sort of things, in our back office tooling as well, this is how kind of ways of working looked like. They had set up an initial kickoff meeting to propose the technical solution, to agree upon it, and to discuss some organizational bits and bobs. Previous to that, they had done spikes, they had done investigation, they had discussed with architects to kind of come up with an approach. We then proceeded to review that solution, ask questions, provide feedback, and possibly iterate on that technical solution. We discussed, organizational things. What is our release schedule looking like? We should create a Slack channel to communicate. Test engineers agreed on a testing strategy, and we also discussed release plans, rollout, and so on and so forth. After you get this out of the way, pretty much, and you agree on a technical solution, the team can start working on the actual implementation and testing of their feature. So, which means that they work on their own branch, but we kind of collaborate and communicate on that Slack channel, or when do they deploy to the test environment and run their tests, and so on and so forth. Then comes the demo part. For this particular feature, we did quite a lot of demos because it's really demoable, and kind of they showed us biggish pieces of work. I know some of the, the changes that happen at API level are not always demoable, but because we had the front-end component, they kind of showed us, okay, this is one feature, okay, we're happy with it, you ask questions, you provide. I think, this part is really to provide really valuable feedback for the team implementing it. Then the really tricky merge request and code review part comes along. This is probably, in my experience, the one that creates the most noise. Because if people have not talked before and they just submit a big merge request and code review, then that can take up days to actually do it. And what we do like is to follow some, let's say, not rules, but kind of some pointers where your code is not reviewed from a functional perspective, it's reviewed from an operational and architectural perspective, because if you would have to review all the functional code, then you wouldn't be able to do your own projects. Then, it has to have sufficient unit tests, and the unit tests need to pass, sufficient coverage, sufficient automation tests, and merge requests for those automation tests need to be submitted as well, and all manual tests, if any, need to be documented, and there's a living documentation of the feature as well. So just so we make sure that when, the next step of handover support happens, we're not left with not knowing what that feature actually does. In this case, in handover support, we were discussing, okay, do we need any alerts in place for this new feature? Do we need any Splunk graphs? Do we need any more logs and stuff to debug? And of course, what we like to do is to have the team have a triage period after, some time to actually be able to do the triage of the incidents themselves without actually coming to the team that supports it operationally. And then we come to the release part. This is actually discussed during the kickoff meeting, at least agreed on a specific week, or, what's your target? When do you want this? Of course, that never materializes in real time, but in this particular case, it was not the release that was of such importance because the feature was dark, so we could release at any time, but more so the rollout plan. And we kept in constant communication with the satellites team to kind of know, okay, now we're rolling out this feature to the UK, now we're rolling out this feature to France, and the rollout actually took longer than the actual release. And then cleanup. And in this case, the only thing that we asked of the team is to actually put in time to clean up their throttles and toggles after all the rollout was done. And this is pretty much how our day-to-day life looks like. So our initial interactions with this process, as you might expect, were not frictionless. As we began using this process to deliver, the squads kind of came up with some guiding principles with the aim of actually reducing the friction to a minimum. Of course, you can't do it all the way, as you can't have 100% automation. So, 1, trust is a given. Yeah, see, it doesn't work. We assume that, as Simon said this morning, everyone wants to do a good job. Everyone wants to maintain code quality. Everyone wants to not release bugs. We want to maintain an open dialogue because constant communication is key for this process to actually work. We then want to maintain a good neighbor policy, which means that project squads should discuss with home squads changes in advance, not blindside you with, oh, hey, I committed something, could you merge it? Well, I don't know what you're talking about. In the same way, home squads actually commit themselves to maintain documentation and maintain the code and actually set expectations for the project squad in terms of, okay, I think your merge is going to take me 5 days, or I think it's going to take me 2 days, and our next release is in 2 weeks' time, so you are welcome to catch that train. And leave it better than you found it. So this one is a tricky one. My view is that, if you find something to improve with that component, don't just report it. Don't just go and say, oh, you have a bug. Just go in there and fix the bug. Or improve unit test coverage, or improve documentation. Don't just say, it's broken. No, just go in and fix it. Fail fast. It's more so about not doing things in isolation, just merging as often, deploying it in integration as often as possible, and most importantly, when you do fail, don't find people to blame for that failure, fix it, and learn from it, and move on. And my personal favorite, if you build it, you clean it, which means, if you've built redundant code, if you built toggles, throttles, you need to put in time to clean it after you've done release it. So why exactly did we go through all this process of changing our ways of working? What did we want to get out of it? Back when only the owning team was coding in their own components, there were plenty of cases where the team became a bottleneck for another team or for another project. For example, in one of the latest projects I did in the old ways of working, before we changed, we wanted to implement sort of a WhatsApp feature for the customer service chat. We had that old school chat where you need to be on the page to be able to speak to a CS agent, and we wanted to get rid of it and have this new WhatsApp type feature. And that meant we had to change it all over. We had to change it on web, we had to change it on mobile web, we had to change it on native apps as well. Which means we had a dependency on the native app team to actually take that feature and implement it into the native apps. Well, suffice it to say that a couple of times I was like, I just want to go in and do it myself. There were a lot of miscommunications, there were a lot of problems, there were a lot of bugs. And for example, Marta from my team had to explain to Lily, I think 3 times, how the damn WhatsApp feature worked. And she was like, well, I'll just go in there and do it myself because we are wasting time. We wanted to work in this open source model before, but we weren't really allowed to do it. But now, a team can actually implement the project end to end. So, taking this example, if we were asked now on a new project to work on native applications? My team consisting of 2 UI developers, 2 Java developers, and 2 testers. I'm sure their first reaction, as some of you here would be, and an understandable one from my point of view, is, but I don't have the knowledge, so how am I supposed to go in and work on native applications? So how can we spread that knowledge? We can only do this if we see it as a long-term investment. Of course, working for the first time on a new code base can be daunting and can take longer than actually working on something you already know. But allowing ample time for people to learn will give people confidence and ability to work better. And with this extra time spent at the start, you can reap the benefits later. So the teams get exposed to different parts of the code base, to different functionalities, to different areas. You get to see what other teams have implemented, how they solved particular problems that you may have come across. And you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can just take code, reuse it, tweak it for your particular problem. And it can be shared, and not doing duplication of code, as Aditi mentioned earlier, saves you a lot of time in the long run to be able to use that code over and over again and learn from it. So I have to admit this is a bit of a tricky one. I've always been an advocate of standardization. It's perhaps in my detail-oriented nature to be one. I like order, I don't like chaos. Not everyone is like me. You know, some people just want to be left alone and do what they've always done and do their own thing. I ain't gonna lie. The process was not as straightforward as it looks now. There was a lot of disagreement at first because people were being used to doing the things their own way. I remember the conversation between Alex and Chris about branching and merging took at least a month, and they agreed to disagree and put forward 2 options for teams to consider. But we managed to get a unified approach to coding, to merging, to release process, to testing. And, you know, I think in my view, to have standardized code is important in any organization or in any way you work, but this is most important in an internal open source way because it makes it easier for people to move from one code base to another, from contributing to one microservices to another, from working with teams across the board. There's always stuff to learn out there, and I think the greatest beneficiary of a change is you as a person. This model opens the door for you as an individual to step outside your comfort zone, to try something new, to contribute to projects outside your specific area of expertise. And it might seem daunting at first. And you might say, well, I don't want to do it. But in the long run, you get familiar with larger parts of the system, which greatly benefits you as an engineer. Also, you get exposed to open source practices. So if you haven't already contributed to an open source project, like Selenium, getting to work in open source in your own company may want for you to contribute to this, because let's be honest, who here is afraid to ask questions of strangers on the internet? And it might be better for you to start in this way and to be more familiar with asking questions of people of your own organization and then contribute to an open source project. And of course, the reverse applies as well. There are a lot of you here who have contributed to an open source project, and you can bring that expertise and that experience and the things that you failed to do on an open source and the mistakes you made, and bring that inside the organization and learn from it and teach others and use that experience to the benefit of your coworkers, of the projects you're working on and your job. And it's not all about technical skills as well, because of course you develop that if you touch something else than Java, if you touch native applications, if you touch React, if you touch whatever. But it also helps you build your interpersonal skills, because communication is key in this process. You need to learn how to talk to people. You need to learn how to communicate that you are not happy with their merge requests and that their code is rubbish in a way where people won't get offended too much. And it really develops your interpersonal skills as well. So now I've shown you my personal context related to change. It may sound simple. I'm describing it after it happened. And that's because, obviously, the past is known. And now looking back, I wonder, it's easy for me to say, oh, yes, I understand why the decision was made. At that time, I wasn't really sure I will ever say this statement. And going through it, both for myself and especially for the people I'm managing, it wasn't a piece of cake. We were having, and still are having, a hard time navigating the way the world has changed around us. So Chris, from my earlier example, is still having a hard time, understanding the fact that we have indeed changed our process of merging, code reviewing, releasing, branching, and to actually be okay with it. And he kind of grumbles from time to time, and, oh, I don't want to do this. It still does, but, it's a process. there are other people who try to circumvent the process. Oh, but the process is not there. I'm just popping up here and putting in a merge request, but I have not discussed this feature with you. Well, you get to the back of the line, and then we can begin with the kickoff meeting, and then we can discuss with everything else. That's why you need advocates. You need people like Jane from my team, who's been a stickler for the process from the beginning. And she's also helped other teams and other people to kind of course, it's new for people to work in this way. So, to have someone to help you and say, well, let's do it this way, this is the process, this is how it works, these are the next steps, it's really helpful. So, let me ask you again this question. How would you navigate this change? Any one of you here in the audience might be in one of the 3 situations I described, or you could be in 100 different ones that I have not known or don't know about. And, it might be easier now for you when you know other people and other organizations have gone through this change process to know that, I've gone through it. Maybe, you've talked to your newly made acquaintance earlier and know they have gone through the same process. But perhaps you're still confused. Perhaps you'll still feel the reaction of, why is this happening to me? What did I do? What should I do? So how exactly, do you improve? Do you improve yourself personally to be able to deal with change? How do you get a head start? Well, you need to get your head out of the code. You need to notice small changes in your organization. You need to notice the patterns. You need to notice the evolution. You need to pay attention to what's going on around you, not entirely in the organization, but in the industry as well. So in your company, where are things headed? In our case, months before the changes were announced, there was a project that was being run in a different part of the organization as a trial run. So the project was run as a so-called focus tribe, where people from various teams were being pulled in and worked 100% only on this project. There's a good reason why a company invests time in a trial run. It's a change, it's a trial. It was really obvious, but I couldn't see it, I have to admit. It escaped me. We were too busy with our own projects, we were too busy with our own code, we were too busy with our own problems. So when the email hit, surprise, and in the future, you can choose whether you join in a change or you don't. You can choose change or change can choose you. But to be able to make that decision to say, well, I want in or I want out, you really need to be informed because, they all say information is power. So keep yourself informed. Keep yourself aware of what's going on around you. Keep yourself aware of what's going on in the industry. Read about it. Pay attention around you. Just don't stick your head in the code. Get it out. So thank you. This is my message, and now we have time for questions.